and he never came home. So I received that phone call that everybody's dreading and never wants to have,
Right.
which literally said those words, and I'll never forget that. It was, "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband deceased in a hotel room in Perth this morning."
Mm.
And I was
Right.
just absolutely floored. It was in the
Right.
prime of our lives. We were 45 years old, and Rob was super fit. He was a surfer. He loved the beach and fishing and
Right.
spearfishing and snorkeling and diving,
Right.
and he was just super healthy and fit. And he had a brain aneurysm and died.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. You've got it locked to the Audacious Living Podcast. I'm Audley Stevenson, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to follow us on our social media channels. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the handle The Audacious Pod. Or if you're watching this episode on YouTube, then you know you've got that bell down below. You can see it there. Just tap it, and you know the sound it makes. Ding, ding, ding. And you're connected to all great things audacious related. Now, we'll be talking about grief and happiness on this edition of the Audacious Living Podcast, and we'll specifically look at the things that we can do to evoke happiness on the other side of troubling times. To help me do this, I've got Marie Alessi joining me here on the podcast. And while Marie is known for her work in the field as grief, as a counselor and coach, her focus is more about creating happiness in her own life and for the lives of others. Marie is no stranger to personal tragedy, and she shares a story that significantly shook her world up, and she had to overcome that personal tragedy to turn it into what she dubs as the happiness movement. So now that the stage is set, here's my conversation with Marie Alessi. Enjoy. Greetings, Marie. Thank you for joining me today here on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you for taking the time like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Great, and I am as well. We scheduled this a little while ago, and I think the topic of loss and grief, is which you spend a lot of time in, is an important one, because when we talk about living our best audacious lives, if we experience some form of loss and grief and we can't get past that, then we can't live the life that we want for ourselves. So I thought maybe as a starting point, you could sort of talk about just your own story and what got you to where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, because I agree. We do not talk enough about grief, and I spend a lot of my time in a space of healing. So my background is in advertising, actually, and
Okay.
I left the advertising world when I met my beautiful husband, and we had 2 boys. So I always knew that advertising and family doesn't mix together. I've seen way too many people try it, in particular with the level of career that I had reached at the time. So I decided to leave and delved into the self-development world, which was an incredible step, in particular when you hear my story and in hindsight. I have started my own coaching business, and I work predominantly with mindset with people. So it was all about big transitions in life. Started off with moms going back into the workforce, and then bigger and bigger business owners and businesses. And everything I did was related to mindset. So I help people with their personal growth to achieve business growth. That was sort of my go-to. And the business was going for about 7 years, and it was climbing and growing quite steadily. And then one day, Rob went on a business trip and he never came home. So I received that phone call that everybody's dreading and never wants to have,
Right.
which literally said those words, and I'll never forget that. It was, "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband deceased in a hotel room in Perth this morning."
Mm.
And I was
Right.
just absolutely floored. It was in the
Right.
prime of our lives. We were 45 years old, and Rob was super fit. He was a surfer. He loved the beach and fishing and
Right.
spearfishing and snorkeling and diving.
Right.
And he was just super healthy and fit. And he had a brain aneurysm and died just like that. So that was the
Wow.
beginning of a huge transition in our life. And I have to say, I have been through a very deep loss beforehand. When I was 20, my dad passed away, and I handled that very differently to how I dealt with Rob's passing, because I had none of those tools. I had
Right.
no background in how do I deal with that. And that's exactly because of what you said, Andy. We don't talk about death
Mm.
and grief enough,
Right.
and how to actually deal with it. So that's what we're going to do here today, right?
Right. Well, and I guess the grief, and I know there's stages, different stages of grief, obviously, that people go through, and um, that initial shock period, though. I mean, when you lose someone, especially someone, a loved one, that initial shock, because you're not expecting, right? You're not expecting, obviously,
Yeah,
that he went away and all of a sudden he didn't come back. Just
yeah,
sort of talk about that initial sort of shock and
yeah.
how you manage
I'd
it.
love to talk about that, because I'm going to bust the myth here straight away. Those so-called stages of grief were never intended to be written for grief. So the author of those, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is renowned in a space of grief, and
Hmm.
she wrote those stages for terminally ill people, not for grief. And they have been misinterpreted her entire
Oh.
career since she's written them for stages of grief. And ever since, people try to squeeze uh, their stages, their life after loss, into those stages, and they don't apply. So
Mm.
shock, yes, maybe that's the only one. But I mean, come on, shock applies to anything and everything
Right.
that we don't
Right.
expect. So this is not a stage of grief. And all the other ones, the bargaining, the denial, that really applies to terminally ill people, but not to the space of
Mm.
grief. I have certainly never experienced any of those, the bargaining,
Right.
the anger, the denial. I had none of that. It felt surreal, absolutely, but I wasn't in
Yes.
denial. I knew my husband had died. I had certainly moments where I felt like, oh, he's just on a business trip. He's coming home tomorrow,
Right.
because
Right.
he'd been
Right.
traveling a lot for work. So, of course, the body and the mind needs time to catch up with such very
Yes.
highly unexpected news at that age. So, yeah, that was that. But for me, I had a huge blessing. I'm going to share that with you straight up, that
Hmm.
Rob and I had this what if conversation. And for
Okay.
anybody listening to that, I would strongly urge you to have this conversation. A lot of people shy away from it because they feel it's too confronting, or they don't know
Right.
what to talk about it. Back to that, we don't talk about it. But
Right.
Rob and I had this conversation one day when he came home from work late. He rang me on his way home and said, "Babe, I'm going to be 2 hours late because there's an accident on Heathcote Road. It's like a sort of one way through the national park road. There's
Hmm.
no way out. If there's an accident and the road is closed, it's like a 2 hour detour. A 2 hour is a huge inconvenience for a family who's waiting for the dad to come home for
Yes.
dinner. But for one family, it meant that their dad never came home, because there was a fatal accident. There was a fatal car crash, and a young dad died that day. And that
Mm.
caused Rob and I to have that conversation,
Right.
because we were so shattered by the news, because our boys were so little, and his boy was younger than ours. He was only like a toddler. And we sat on the bed that night and we had this conversation, what would you do? What do you want me to do? What would I want you to do? And it ended sort of in a nutshell in, if something was to happen to me, I
Hmm.
want you to create the happiest life possible for the boys and yourself. That was sort of the nutshell conversation that we had. And I meant it wholeheartedly. We both meant it, because that's what love is. Love is simple.
Yes.
Love just wants you to be happy. And that I would have never thought that, but a couple of years later, that became my North Star. The moment I had to walk
Wow.
downstairs to tell our boys the news that their dad had passed,
And how old are
that's
they
when
at this
that
point?
sentence came back into my mind. They were
How,
8 and 10.
oh, wow. So even
Mm,
at a very young age to fully conceptualize what you were telling them.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh boy. Boy. Wow. Um, the idea of having a happy life afterwards, that
Mm.
conversation is so powerful. I mean, it's such a blessing that
Yeah.
you're able to have that conversation. I think though where
I
it's
want to keep it real here, though. Like,
yeah,
I had no idea how to do that. I just
sure,
knew
sure, sure,
that was
sure,
my direction,
sure.
that was okay. Let's
But,
see.
but Marie, no one has a roadmap on how to deal with tragic
No.
events, right? We just that after a traumatic situation or traumatic event, it's still feasible to find joy and
Mm.
happiness, right? And
Oh,
no matter
yeah,
how deep you are in that moment and how bad it may seem,
absolutely.
I think the piece to understand it's for that moment. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
extended.
absolutely. That is such a valid point. It's temporary. Everything in life is temporary. It's just incredible when you face an adversity like that.
Right.
I often say to clients I work with, when things get really tough,
Mm-hmm.
really, really tough, just add the words right now. So I can't deal with this right now. Life's really shit right now.
Right now. Right.
It's like, it's temporary. You'll get through this. You will.
Pain is temporary.
Mm,
The,
I feel for you.
the point I was going to make is you say you have a very different approach when it comes to grief. I want you to expand on
Yeah.
that, what that approach is.
Yeah. So I knew in that moment when I told my boys, and when I had this sentence come back to me, I want you to create the happiest life for the boys. That came back to me when I was hugging them, when they were crying, when they were screaming. And in that moment, it became my North Star. So from that very moment, I did everything I could to fulfill that promise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, every decision I had to make was based on that simple fact. Is this going to make us happy? Yes or no?
Right.
Is this going to make life better? Yes or no? It became so simple. I'm not saying it was easy,
No.
absolutely not, but it became simple. And when you're going through tragedy, when you're going through something that is so unexpected and goes so deep, then simple is exactly what you need, one step at a time sort of approach. And that's what I did. So people didn't understand when
Right.
I went through life looking at how can we find happiness. They were like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they've said things to me like, well, she must be in denial, or she's still in shock, or some even thought I was not grieving properly, but they had no idea what was going on internally. What they saw was the outside, me trying my best I could to create the happiest life possible for the boys. We went snorkeling and we did
Right.
things like we traveled around the world for 2 months because I
Okay.
knew I wanted to create new and happy memories for them. That was my number one, my North Star, basically. That was my direction. But what was going on internally, there was still grieving going on. There was
Yes.
still immense sadness going on. Yet I know for a fact that all of that can coexist. It's not the one or the other. That's the
Right.
biggest message here. It's not
Right.
one or the other. So many people don't allow happiness in because they think or feel it's inappropriate or they're not supposed to be happy. But we all are, and we all need happy moments. We all need laughter and lightness and fun in the midst of all of that. We need that. We're human beings. So a lot of people have learned to just suppress that or neglect that need because, you can't possibly. Yes, you can, especially when you were married to somebody like Rob. It's like, yeah, I want you to be happy, babe. It's like, I knew that he'd be cheering me on and that he would want that for us, So that was my approach.
I love the conversation about finding moments to be happy, and actually even the question you asked, will this make me happy right now? It's very
Yeah.
intentional, right? It's very, very intentional, and
Exactly.
it gives you that opportunity to even recognize the space that you're in, because sometimes you're in like a sad or down moment and don't even really know that you're there. You're just there.
Yeah.
You just know you don't feel good. But by being very intentional, by saying, will this make me happy now? It also gives you sort of, to kind of snap out of it, if you will. If that makes sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. I also just like the idea of you want a 2-month trip as examples. They like very again very intentional. but looking for that happiness. And I think another important point here is that it is very possible in the moments of your deepest grief to find happy moments. I remember once I shared a quick story. I was with a friend of mine, and he was going through a very difficult challenge, very challenging moment, and he was down. And so we went out with a bunch of friends, and I kind of stood back and watched him, and he was having the time of his life. And I remember even we took a group photo, and I took the photo, and I showed him that picture, and I said, "Look how happy you are. Remember, you're supposed to be miserable right now. You're supposed to be miserable now. Well, look how happy you are in this moment. Remember the things that make you happy." And so he liked being around family and friends. So I said, find ways to be around family and friends as much as you possibly can, even in your moments of grief and unhappiness. So that's a powerful.
I love that.
I was going to say tool, but I would say a powerful approach, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. It changes everything, and it's it makes it a lot easier to get there. Yeah, because like grief is deep enough and tough enough as it is. So if you can add anything to it that adds lightness, that adds even just glimpses or moments of fun and laughter, do it. Honestly, your loved one would be so happy about it. I can promise you that. Do the role reversal. Like I often say that to people, do the role reversal. If it was you who had passed and you'd be looking down at your loved ones, would you want them to be falling apart and in absolute misery? Or would you want nothing but joy and happiness and healing for them, And that's when they often go like, And some people are cheeky and go like, well, my husband wouldn't want me to be happy because, and I'm like, all right, let's change that perspective then and go like, what would love do? Because where they are now, there's nothing but the purest unconditional love. And from that space, try again and think what would you want for your loved ones? What would love do? That's my absolute favorite quick question. I've even got it as a screensaver on my phone. What would love do?
And I think what it really does, it forces to think, to be conscious about it, right? And again, I think there's so much of when we talk about going through moments of grief, the more conscious we can be about where we are, right? Because if we're, I think if we're conscious about, okay, I'm not in a good space now, it can help you. I'm not saying it's easy to get out of. I'm not suggesting that at all, but it's easier to get out of when you're more conscious, as opposed to just being in this this state of grief and uncontrollable emotions, right? So find ways to be more conscious is what I would suggest.
Absolutely. And it's a really valid point, actually, Amy. I'm glad you're making that, because I remember when I was in a really deep hole one day, and it was when we came back from traveling. It was about 8 months or so after Rob passed, and I found myself sitting upstairs in the living room. I'm saying upstairs because I've got my office downstairs under the house. And I found myself sitting on the living room floor, and the boys had gone back to school because the next school year started. And I had 2-3 weeks before I started my coaching journey with the guy who helped me build the movement. We'll definitely talk about that in a moment. But I sat on the floor, and I had, for the first time in 8 months, no next step plan for the next 10 days. And I was like, wow. And I remember finding myself in this hole. It was really dark, actually. And I thought, I sat there, and it felt like, and I often talk about this as the hole and the hill experience, because I felt like as if there was a really deep hole opening to my right. And I was looking sort of over the edge carefully, and I thought to myself, that to me feels like what people talk about in depression. And I better not step in there, because if I slide down into that hole, I might not be able to come out. And then I felt like to my left, there was this little pile of new happy memories that we made since Rob died. And I had no strength left to climb onto that little hill to get a better view. So I just allowed myself to stay in the middle. And I often talk about that now as the observer position. When things get really tricky and really dark and really unsurmountable, when you feel like I can't do this right now. At the words right now, then look at your situation and try to go into the observer role. Just observe your thoughts, your feelings. You don't need to evaluate those feelings. You don't need to make sense of them. You don't need to follow any of those dark thoughts. That's a very, very important message here. You do not need to follow every dark thought you have.
Yes.
You can just observe it.
Yes.
And just sometimes maybe see what would happen if I would follow that. Do I want that for my life? No. Stay in the observer role. Not everybody's capable of doing that. I understand that. I really want to appreciate that people do fall into depression, and they definitely do need professional help with that. But very often it is just, under quotation marks, a mindset thing where you can allow yourself to step out of it and become the observer. And that has been super helpful for me on days like that. And luckily I didn't have very many of those, but it is such a helpful tool. Just observe. You don't need to follow every dark thought.
I love that, because our thoughts can betray us, and they can send us down this winding path if we're not careful.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, so don't follow them. And again, observe. So I like that. I like that strategy and approach. Even the idea of the memories, right? You know, that so you talk about creating memories, but even for our loved ones, remembering the happy memories, there's some encouragement in that. Obviously, there's a potential to create more grief because you're remembering the good times and missing them. But I do think there's some value. I wonder if you can comment on that, how in terms of how helpful that is in the process.
Yeah, I truly love it. And I have people who say, no, it sends them down the rabbit hole. It makes it even worse. But my thing is that, again, I have a very different approach around that, because I love love. I love love. So when I'm down, I love looking at couples that are happy. Other people go like, oh, that makes me even more miserable. But I have the absolute ability to be happy for people. Like, even just before I came live with you, I saw a beautiful post of a lady I met through networking, and she wrote about this new love in her life, and oh my God, and it was so worth waiting for you. And it was so beautiful. And I was so incredibly happy for her. And I wrote that. And as I'm writing this, I'm like, wow, people might think, oh, poor Marie, and I'm like, no, gone with that thought. Don't need that. Why would people even think that about me? I'm happy for her. Maybe people don't even think twice if I write or not. But for me, it just makes my day. I think it's so beautiful seeing couples in love, or love comes in so many different forms. It doesn't always have to be couples where you're like, oh, why is that not me? It is more like, even when you see a mom having a baby, or like, I don't know, a smile from a checkout chick, love can come in so many different forms.
Sure.
And I often say that to people. That is one of my go-to tools that I share with people. Focus on the things that you want in your life. And if you want love in your life, and it doesn't always have to be in the form of a romantic partner, just love in your life, then focus on that. Focus on where you can see that around you, because it's everywhere. Like, it's everywhere. Once you start focusing on it, you can't stop seeing it. It's And it works with the negative as well. So you may as well choose something positive.
That's right. Well, I was going to say that sometimes to focus on love, to help generate more love, is create love, right? So you give it, and either it'll come back directly to you, or it'll come back in another form, right? But the thing 100%. That you want to be a part of the creation of it. And I think that helps with the.
I love it. Yes.
With the love movement, which I think is a nice segue into the love movement, which you've created. I wonder if you could talk about that.
I love that you call it the love movement. Yeah, my movement is called Loving Life After Loss. It really does focus on the loving life part. It is the direction that I wanted for this movement, because after Rob passed, and I looked for, I was among where I thought maybe this could help me. Maybe I need to look for some grief support groups. But honestly, the grief support groups that are out there, and I put support on a quotation marks on purpose, do not offer a lot of support, unfortunately. So when I looked into those groups, there was a lot of wailing and staying in the suffering, staying in the pain, and comparison battles at their finest. Whose husband was younger, who died more tragic, who had more kids, whose kids were younger, whose kids weren't even born yet. And I thought, oh my God, people, what are you doing? How on earth is this helping anybody heal?
Yes.
Comparison doesn't help us heal. We need to learn to be there for each other, to listen to each other, and not when one person shares their darkest moment and is waiting for somebody to jump on and help, then everybody else jumps on and says how theirs is even worse. Well, how else is
Right.
this helping me? You know, I'm here for support, but I started giving everybody else support rather than receiving it. So I'm like, oh, that's not helping me because it's draining me, it's draining me even more so. So I started loving life after loss because I felt this is what is missing in this world. This is what's needed more than anything. Somebody to hold space for you and to shower you with love and support when you're going through your deepest, darkest era. And the most beautiful part is having that as a name of the group. It also acts as a really great filter because only those who actually want that part, that loving life after loss, only those come in. People are not drawn to the group with a title like that if they don't deeply want it. Somewhere inside of them is that hope, that glimpse of hope that they can have that. And it is also a call to action, the loving life after loss. It's a way of life. So I absolutely adore that title. Didn't come from me. I'm not claiming that.
No problem. No problem. But you're using it wisely. A friend of mine
came up with it, and I love it. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, the topic of love. It's discussed often. We use it in our everyday language, but it's not always exhibited. It's really fascinating when you talk about love because it's again, we all say it, we all acknowledge it, but it's not always demonstrated. I wonder if that is a function of not being clear on what truly love is about. What do you think?
Wow, that's quite profound, actually, when you say that. Yeah, absolutely. That rings very true when you say that. Maybe people don't know what that is about. And often when you say that, what came up for me is that people sometimes maybe see it as a one-way street,
Right.
Why am I not receiving that anymore? Where is it? How has it stopped?
Right.
Or my husband died and now there's no love anymore. Well, no, love isn't a one-way street.
Right.
Love is everywhere. And like you just said so beautifully, Andy, it is the best way of creating love and for it to come back to you is to hand it out freely. I have this image of a guy, I don't know, you probably get it where you live too in Canada, but there's a guy that was running around in Sydney in a city center, and he had this sign, free hugs, and I'm like, oh, I love this is so beautiful, free hugs. I'd be the first person who would walk up and hug him, because this is just me, I'm a hugger. So I'm not saying run around with a sign, free hugs on the street, but if that tickles your fancy, if that is your jam, do it by all means. But it's just whatever way, shape or form you can hand it out and really share love into the world, even if it's just sitting at home and doing it energetically, you will see how your whole physiology, your energy, your moods will change. It will really do something to you because it changes your focus.
Yes, it
and
does.
That's what you need.
What I also love about, again, here I'm using love. What I also love about it is the fact of the impact that it can have on others, right? And so sometimes on the odd occasion I'll be at the drive-through and I'll pay for the person's order behind me and I'll drive off, and they have no choice but to receive it and be happy about it. And
so beautiful. I love it.
but maybe they then exhibit that with someone else. Right. Or maybe that becomes a story that they share, right? Like, oh, you went to the drive-thru and they gave this to me for free. Maybe there's all sorts of things that can come out of that. And what I like about that, it doesn't, like, I don't even know the person, right? I have no way I may never, I don't know who they look like. I may never see them ever again, but I've impacted them in a way that's just so beautiful. And so, so when we talk about love and acts of kindness and generosity, those can generate so much wonderful emotions.
Yeah, I want to quickly share a story because I love that you say that, because I have sometimes or quite a few times actually heard somebody saying, I paid something forward or somebody paid something forward to me. And every single time somebody told me this story, I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't done it for a while. And then I go out and do it. And as you said, it creates such a ripple effect and it's so beautiful. And it doesn't always have to be with money either. It just reminded me when you shared the story of the drive-through. I'm going to quickly share mine as well because it really made my day. There's this young gentleman and his voice is quite distinct that works at our local McDonald's, where sometimes, I would take the boys after school and get them a Slurpee when it's a really hot day. I'm not a huge fan of it. Anyway, let's not go there. But that voice, I know when it's him, when he works there. And every time I drive through, he has got the happiest
I love it.
manner that anyone could have. He's so friendly, so beautiful. He oozes it.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I decided I actually wanted to write him a message, and then I didn't have anything in my car. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to say it to him. And I stopped there and I said, I'm sorry, I just want to say something to you. I said, every time I come here and you take my order and I already know it's you when I'm there, it makes my day because you have got the friendliest manner that
Nice.
anyone could have working in a job like this. It always makes my day. And I just wanted to tell you that and thank you for that. And
Wow.
he almost melted and fell apart. And I said, you have no idea what that means to me, because today it's been 10 years I've been working here. And for you to acknowledge my friendliness is all I needed. And I was like, oh my
Wow.
God. So the timing was picture perfect too. And I had no idea,
Wow.
But it's so
Wow.
beautiful. It doesn't cost you a lot to say
No.
something friendly. And that, to me, I often talk about the hidden gifts in adversity. One of the biggest hidden gifts in adversity I received after my dad passed was exactly that, to never leave anything unsaid when it comes to love, happiness, friendliness,
Yeah.
never leave anything unsaid. And I do things like that all the time. My boys are so used to it,
Yeah.
stopping strangers on the side of a road and go like, I love your dress. Oh my God, what a
Yeah.
beautiful color. Or,
Yeah.
oh my God, you're such a beautiful couple. Look at you. You're oozing love. I say things like that all the time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't cost a lot. It maybe costs a little bit of convincing at first to get out of your shell and do it. But the knock-on effect, oh my God, it's just
It
so
is.
beautiful to see the ripple effect in the world.
It is. I love it. And I love that. And I'm very similar as well, where I do take advantage of opportunities. I mean, the one thing that I'm very conscious about is if someone crosses my mind, like a friend I haven't talked to in a long time, I reach out right
You
away.
call them.
If
Love it.
if they cross my mind, I'm like, oh, I haven't talked to so-and-so. I don't just talk about that I haven't talked to them in a long time. I actually, well, you know what? Let's end the drought and let's call them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I do that all the time. The other thing I try to do as much as possible is recognize the I was gonna say the transformation, but recognize the positive things in individuals. The young woman I used to work with years ago, and when I knew her, she was very quiet and very shy, and she was very introverted. And then fast forward, 5 or 6 years later, I was on this big conference call, and she's leading the call, and I'm going, oh my gosh, the person who I knew would not have led this call. And after the call, I actually sent her a message just to say, I don't know if you remember me, but you and I used to work together, 5 or 6 years ago. And I just want to say that the transformation in you between then and now is phenomenal. I don't know what you did. I don't know how you did it, but you need to know that it's done wonders. And I really appreciate you. Well, she wrote back and just gushing and, oh, thank you. And started a little bit of her story and talked about that she wanted to make conscious changes, and she did. And she's really happy where she is. Again, though, that's an act of love. Acknowledging
so beautiful.
something, especially in a moment where someone, in her case, she was very conscious about trying to make that change, and it worked. Well, she needs to know that
and
it
to
worked.
receive that recognition, so beautiful,
right?
And doesn't it make you feel so much better too when you say it and then receive that beautiful feedback?
But look what's happened. Here, if you follow what's happened here. So I've shared that with her. There's no doubt in my mind that she's undoubtedly shared that story with someone else, but I'm now sharing that story with you as well, right? And we're all looking at,
I love
right?
it. Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
it's just naturally spreading. And so for me, if we can find ways to share this love that we're talking about, and share or take advantage of opportunities to be a positive difference in other people's day, then why not do it?
Yeah. I think so too, and if you are sitting at home thinking now, how am I going to get through this? I'm not feeling great. Go out and do something like that. It will make your day. It will make you feel better too. Or just go out and sit in nature. Nature is so healing, and it's usually all around us. Even when you live in a big city, there's definitely a park somewhere, or a tree, or a little patch of grass where you can stand barefoot in.
it's whatever you need to do to get yourself to a better
Yeah.
place. I absolutely
Yeah.
encourage that. And so, and even in this dialogue, Marie, what I love about it is we, and again, you work in the field of grief. We've talked more about love than grief, right?
Yeah,
Right?
because I said to you at the beginning, I work in the field of healing.
Yes, that's right.
So
That's
people
right.
always
That's
say,
right.
so you're grief coach? I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't really like that title, grief coach.
Right.
I work in the space of healing. I always
Yes.
have to focus on the emphasis on healing, on
Yep.
love, and
Yep.
not on grief and sadness. It is,
Yep.
it's the same thing, but my focus is different. The direction is different, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, the grief and sadness is only part of the story as I see it, right? Like,
Yeah.
we and the part of the story that I take, any story, quite frankly, I take heart in and I appreciate is I love hearing how people get through those sad moments, those down times, those challenging instances. And I want to hear how they overcame. What was the bridge that got them to love? How did they, get past this thing that they thought was so debilitating that they couldn't move, and they did, right? That's where the true value is, when you share your stories with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love those stories, because for me, coming back to what we just said, I only ever see it as where I pick people up from. When they're in this deep funk, in the sadness, in the debilitating pain and excruciating, like, it is really painful. I don't want to negate that.
Yes.
I don't want to try to play that down, not at all. I wholeheartedly appreciate what that feels like. I've been there multiple times in my life, but I don't want you to stay there. It's temporary. It's not your destination. It's not your final destination. And I actually wrote I call it my LinkedIn love letter. Every Friday morning, I write a love letter on LinkedIn into the community. And I actually wrote about, I didn't want Rob's end of the road. No, sorry. I'm completely messing this up, because I don't see that as Rob's end of the road anyway, not from a spiritual perspective. I said, I didn't want Rob's passing to be the end of the road. I saw it as the beginning of everybody else's healing path, because that is what I found as my mission, to help people to find their path to healing. And everyone has got a different path. And I'm more than happy to sit with you and find that for you. So I even say to people, I'll meet you at the edge of the rabbit hole. I'm not going to come down there and pick you up, because I've been down there. I'm not going back.
Yes.
But I'll wait at the edge of the rabbit hole till you're ready, and I'll reach down as far as I can, and I'll drag you out if I must. But I'll get you. I've got you, and we're going to get you out of there, and I'll help you. And honestly, everything we do, every huge transformation that I was very blessed to witness in our group at our retreats, has started with a shift in perspective, has started with looking into the direction of healing. Because what it does, it automatically lets you turn away from the pain. You look into a more positive direction, and that's how it starts. There's a lot of other things you can do along the way, and we've got you.
I oftentimes use the analogy, life is like a series of sort of hills and valleys, right? And so when you go down in the valley, that's where it's crappy and you don't feel good and all the bad stuff happen. But the hill is where you want to celebrate life and joy and happiness and laughter. And so we're acknowledging the valleys are there, right? But you don't have to stay in the valley. And right. And so what I oftentimes will say that I think individuals, like, take whatever time you need to get yourself better. Maybe I'm in the valley a bit longer than you are, right? Maybe I need to be there, but it's because it's very individualized. So take what you need for yourself, but know that your place isn't to stay. Just as you said, it's not your destination. There's much more life that's waiting for you. You just got to go get it.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing is, I love this analogy so much, because people always go like, you have to go to the valley. I'm like, well, I've already built a bridge. You may as well use it. You can come across the bridge with me, and I've tested it. I've jumped on it. It's stable. You can come across, So, I mean, I love those analogies. But people so often say, there's no shortcut through grief. I'm like, well, but there is a long way around. So if there's a long way around, there's also a shortcut, and you're allowed to use it. You are allowed to use it. It doesn't mean that you're not walking through it. But if there's a shorter way, if there's a whole group of people who got you, who can be your guide along the way and go like, hey, I know there's a shorter way around here. Come with us. Why wouldn't you do it? Why would
Yes.
you walk through the desert on your
Yeah.
own, through the darkness, and maybe lose your way along the way? I mean,
Right.
it's your choice. At the end of the day, it's your choice. If you want to walk the long way around, absolutely. And I'm not mocking anyone doing that.
No,
It's
not
just
at all.
you have to find your own path. But I want you to know that
Very,
there is
yeah.
a different path. Yeah.
Very individualized, very, very
Mm.
individualized. And what you do is very different from what I do, and what I do is very different
Yeah.
than Sally or Mark or Jim or Bob. We all
Yeah.
have our own path, and the hazard is when you sort of compare each other's journeys, because then you lose sight of where you're at and what you need to do to get yourself
Mm.
better, because you're focusing on someone else. Focus on
Yeah.
yourself. Focus on the happiness, focus on the love, right? That would be your message. You'd
Yeah.
say focus on the love, and
Yeah.
and that's how you get you to yourself. That's how you get yourself to a better place quicker.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Man, Marie, this is just a wonderful, wonderful chat. I'm so appreciative of this, and
Thank you. Likewise.
I do love. Again, I'm playing on the word love here, but I do love your approach to how you heal ourselves, or how we have to heal
Mm.
ourselves, and we focus on the love and focus on the happiness, and make that, as you said, our North Star. So I really thank
Yeah.
you for that. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, learn about the movement or the work that you do, where can we send them?
I think the easiest option is to go to my website, which is mariealessi.com. So it's my first name, last name.com. And from there, you have all the connections. You can find the link to our movement, which is a Facebook group. You can find the link to my 2 books, my TEDx talk, Redefining Our Image of a Widow. Love it, love it. I'll talk about all the labels and why not to use them, because I don't feel like a typical widow when you look at me.
Yeah.
And then, we have our retreats, we have our healing programs. But I think the number one thing I want to say to you is just reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to just sit and have a chat and point you in the right direction where I feel that it would be the easiest start for you. It's still your choice. This is really, just a quick conversation of where you're at and how do I think you could move through that the quickest. And you have the option to book that on the website as well. And you'll find so much material, beautiful podcasts like ours. If you allow me, I will share it there as well. So yeah.
Amazing, so amazing. And again, the reason why I love that, and I'll bring it back to this podcast, because when you can move through that grief process, quicker than as quick as you possibly can, and get healed and continue the healing, and at the same time also showing love, that will put you in a position where you can live your best audacious life ever. And so that has to be the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Great. Marie, thank you for the time. It's such a blessing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing, and congratulations on all your work, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Back we are here on the podcast, and of course I got to send my thanks and appreciation to Marie for being here and sharing her insights and talking about how we all can create happiness in our own lives. So Marie, I appreciate you. Thank you very, very much. When I think back to the conversation I had with Marie, I really appreciated so much of what she had to say. So a lot of stuff really hit home. But if there's just one thing that I take from our conversation, it would have to be this. Experiencing grief is a natural part of life, and it can be difficult and an emotional journey. Whether you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, or the end of a relationship, or any sort of significant change, it's important to remember that it's okay to feel sad and to grieve. However, it's also essential to find ways to create moments of happiness during this difficult time. Taking care of yourself is one of the things we can do for instantly right away for ourselves, and it's important that we do things like get enough sleep, rest, and are eating well, plus exercise. While it's important to give yourself time and space to grieve, it's also essential to connect with others. Reach out to friends and family members who can offer support and comfort during a challenging time. Even in those difficult moments, there are still things to be grateful for. So practice gratitude. Take time to focus on the things that in your life that bring you joy and happiness. Engaging in activities that give you that sense of purpose and meaning can create so many moments of happiness. Mindfulness is a practice of being present in the moment, accepting your thoughts and your feelings. When we're mindful, we can help cope with the grief by allowing you to acknowledge your emotions without judging or demonizing them. Remember, creating moments of happiness during times of grief doesn't mean that you're not allowed to feel sad or to mourn. Those are natural human emotions that we all are allowed to feel. It's a way to help you cope and find some joy in your life, even during those challenging moments. So give yourself permission to grieve, and don't be afraid to reach out for help and support if you need it. We've come to the end of another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. And as always, I extend my thanks and appreciation to all those lovers of Audacious, as you amazing listeners, and what keep this thing going. And for that, I say thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.